Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of Your HR Career. I'm really excited to be speaking to somebody from a different background today, and that is the lovely Hannah Horner. Thank you for being a guest on the show, Hannah, and welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Jane.
So I'm looking forward to an interesting chat. I did share some questions with you before the show, which we will be referring to. So if listeners wonder what we're referring to, we're talking about some of the questions, but I'm going to pick out some of the interesting ones, if that's okay with you. Hannah, and just prompt you to talk to us about your career. So talk to us first about where it all began, because I'm always interested to know how HR people got into HR. So tell us your story.
I know it's not one that often comes up on the usual career fair, is it? The HR side of things. So it tends to be something that people have often kind of landed in, I find.
Yes.
So I actually, from being a teenager, I was really clear what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a solicitor. Well, initially I wanted to be a barrister, and then I realised I wasn't going to be good at the theatrics of that. Decided I wanted to be a solicitor. Went through GCSEs, A-levels, went and did a law degree, and then I went and did. You then have to do a year's solicitor's exams. Mm-hmm. So I went and did that, paid lots of money to do so. And then during that time, realised that I didn't think it was going to quite be for me. Two of the areas that I was really interested in, I didn't feel I could do longer term. That was kind of like family and criminal law. And I didn't think that would be right for me. And I was a bit lost at that point, to be perfectly honest, apart from knowing that I didn't want to carry on with that. So I never applied for a training contract, and I never qualified as a solicitor. I made my decision then. So at that point, I'd worked at a hotel for years. Previously, as part-time through university, all the rest of it, school and everything. And I just went back there and worked there full-time for a year. And while I was there, just to try and work out what I wanted to do and make a bit of money alongside to pay off my debts. Yeah. And while I was there, one day the general manager came and spoke to me and said, "We've got someone going on sick in HR, and could you do 6 weeks there?" I was like, "Yeah, why not? Do a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, brilliant, not a problem for me." And I really enjoyed it. I very quickly realised, because I'd worked in the hotel for so long and had so many friends there and things, HR probably wasn't the right place to be at that hotel for me.
Right.
Something that I really wanted to do and progress. The hotel was part of a larger group who were buying the Queen's Hotel in Leeds at the time, and they needed an HR assistant there. So that's where it all started for me. I just a bit of luck along the way, and a general manager who really rated me and supported me to kind of do something a bit different.
Interesting. And I think it's surprisingly common how many people who are in HR either have a bit of a law thing or a bit of an ex-police thing is quite common too. It's about this sort of clarity of rules and being comfortable with rules, I think. Yeah. And in terms of sort of the similarity, what do you think it was that manager saw in you that thought might be right for HR?
I just think he knew that I was a bit more capable. I think the legal side, he knew that I was interested in that side of things, and that was probably the closest thing within a hotel that you would get to that side of things. He knew I was a good, safe pair of hands that could be trusted, but also well connected and well liked within the hotel as well, I think. Yeah. So, I mean, I'd like to think it was that rather than that he was just desperate, but it could be neither.
Well, we can make up whatever reason you make. So interesting, very good. And so in that role then, I asked you a question before the session about what your biggest lesson was, and the lesson you learned was from that period when you were working at the hotel. So tell me about what you took away as your biggest HR learning from that part of your career.
I think every hotel is, as much as you may be part of a larger organisation, you're also working as a single business. So, and the stakes are high, and it's a really fast-paced environment. I think, having spoken to lots of people since then, and people in different careers. I think retail is where it peaks at that fast-paced nature.
Yes.
But hospitality, particularly the hotel industry, is pretty fast-paced. Everything changes day to day, and bookings come in. You know, you're talking about your big room bookings, events, conferences, things like that. Things get cancelled, and you know, all of the money side of things is so tight and so clear, and everyone has to kind of work to a really strong budget. So for me, the things that I really learnt with the building relationships quickly and effectively, and that collaboration piece. So you would never work on your own as part of anything. You know, within HR, you'd be working really closely with the managers within different departments, but you'd also be working with finance really, really closely, as well as the general manager, making sure that everything was on everything that they needed as well. And from that, really, it's that bit of mucking in as well. You know, the operational departments, people are working really, really long hours, and there are real pressure points where everybody just has to get involved, no matter what department you work in. So, you know, whether that was at the Queen's Hotel on a Friday night, we'd all be down on the desk, and anyone that had a driver's license was driving around to park cars underneath the hotel at the time, or you were laying up for a big banquet or something like that. So yeah, it was very much mucking in, building good relationships, and collaborating. And those are real things that I've taken forward with me on my career. And as you get into larger organisations, people do tend to work in silos more.
Yes.
And, you know, what I think I have brought to certain circumstances is building those relationships across, especially support services, to better deliver for those operational services.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that idea of building relationships, particularly early in your career, is a really good way, isn't it, of connecting and making things happen. Tell me a bit about one of the challenges I often hear from people in HR is that, you know, well, we can't get too close to people because, you know, we're dealing with confidential stuff, or what if I end up having to discipline that person and they think we're friends, and that can be a challenge. How did you deal with that early on in your career?
I would say it's about building relationships with mutual respect, everyone understanding what job you are there to do.
Yeah.
I do realise absolutely that you get into those circumstances, and you can do. I found there was one really tricky situation for me where I was working within a hotel and I had to deal with a bullying allegation against a peer, and that was really difficult, and it was a real strain on me. It was obviously a strain on them, and the wider team as well. And I think throughout that, I just kept my sense of what was the right thing to do in that situation.
Yeah.
I was respectful. I was supportive where I could and needed to be, but I ensured that the matter was dealt with properly.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that any of us came out of that unharmed, because people, you know, it had a big impact on the whole senior team. But I did what I felt was the right thing to do, and I would still stand by what I did.
Yeah.
Now.
So it's sort of having a professional line almost, isn't it? So you're human and you're compassionate, but there is a line, and it's kind of understanding what part you're playing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, like you say, that compassionate side as well. So, you know, not just playing it as by the rules. It's about understanding the impact of everyone on everyone as you go through the processes that you do.
And I like your description of sort of doing what feels right, because I think that really connects to the humanity of it, doesn't it? Because people are very stressed and it can be a very challenging situation, and therefore a little bit of compassion can go a long way, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you know, things dealt with compassion can mean a better result for everyone. Not the best result for everyone, but
not always. And do you think that kind of leaning into the compassion of HR, do you think that gets easier as you become more experienced / older, depending on what?
I think for me, definitely, because I probably get the, you know, at the time I didn't really have a lot of a lot of outgoings. I didn't really, I probably didn't understand life as a proper adult as much as now.
Yeah.
I didn't have a family. I didn't have, those kind of things, which obviously have a greater impact on you whenever you're going through anything like that. So I do think that, with age, I have probably become more compassionate, but I think it's partly in my nature. That's an approach that I would rather take. And I do try and understand everything from everybody's perspective.
Yeah.
And as well as an HR professional, I'm now an accredited mediator, and that is part of that process. Understanding that there is more than one side to a story. So
and that's a really helpful mindset, isn't it, to come into? Yeah, excellent, very, very good. And so, sort of allied to that, then I asked you about what advice you would give to somebody starting in their career now, and you talk a little bit about making sure you're kind of open to anything that comes up. So you gave that great example of somebody saying 6 weeks of comment in HR, sure, why not? I like that idea of thinking, give it a try. And you also talked about finding challenge within your job, which I thought was really interesting. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I think it's really hard at times, isn't it, in HR, because you're a support service, you're seen as someone there to get stuff done for people, and not always a manager's expecting you to challenge what they're asking.
They want you to say yes and do their bidding, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in different organisations, the expectations of HR are very different, whether that's supporting a manager to do it or doing it on a manager's behalf. And so it can all be very different, and in different circumstances, very different. But one thing that is really important to me is that I make sure that there are the best outcomes out of a situation. And I believe that I can help that to happen, whether it's a reactive situation, such as a disciplinary or a grievance or performance or whatever, or a more proactive strategic approach of how we're going to build a better workplace culture, for example.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, I think that challenge and sharing of my professional expertise and experience is a really important part to help managers make the best decisions that they can.
Yeah, and that can be really frightening, can't it? Particularly early on in your career, you think, oh, they're just going to kick me out the door, or this particular manager's just not going to get on with me. But you had a really nice story about that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, not so much from earlier on in my career. It was probably about 5 years ago, and it was while I was going through the process of applying for a more senior role. And at the time, I was working closely with the directorate leadership team within a council, a local authority, and I was working with the director of children's services, and I'd been working with him for a few years by that point. Now, when we first started working together, he did not like me working with me. I found that was quite apparent. He probably didn't realise how much I realised. So at that point, when I was applying for that next level role, and he was supporting me with that application, he encouraged me to apply for it and things like that. So I said to him, well, as part of that, can you just let me know what's changed? Because I had become very much a trusted advisor of his, and I was a bit of a go-to person for him, which you often become in HR, because at that senior level, the managers don't have that many people that they can trust and talk to around situations. Yeah. So I said, what was it? What made that change? And he came back and said, the thing is, you really annoyed me because you weren't doing what I wanted. I asked you to do stuff and you'd come back with a barrage of reasons why you wouldn't do it, or what we should do differently or whatever. And he said, but now I realise that I make better decisions because of the challenge that you provide. So he might not go with my advice or anything like that, but he felt that challenge was really important in him making making those decisions.
So that helped him make a more thorough decision, perhaps a more considered decision. Yeah.
He considered, he might have said, no, I don't think, I take your point, but this is more important. It was like, but you challenged me, and therefore I know that I'd made that decision for the right reasons and not just because I thought it was the best thing to do.
Yeah. And did that level of challenge feel brave to you at the time?
At the time when I first started working with him, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I didn't feel that he appreciated it. But I suppose you talked about, like, was it harder earlier on in your career? It's probably something that I started very early on in my career.
Yeah.
Probably pretty good at being a little bit annoying.
It's in your nature.
Asking those difficult questions.
Yeah.
But I'm also very open to other people's views. So it's not that I go into it in a, well, this is what you have to do because this is the right thing to do. I go about it in a, have you thought about this? And, you know, what are the potential outcomes here? And how could they be different if this happened, or if we did this, or, you know, what's going to happen if we don't do this? What's everyone going to say? Or if we do this, what impact will that have on an individual or a group of people? And what's the likely outcome of that? So I suppose it's not just specific challenge around issues. It's more that kind of coaching approach of, well, what are the potential outcomes here and what might we have to deal with?
Yeah.
Is that, because I always think HR is all about risk, and what risk therefore is higher.
Yep.
And you make the decision having done a proper kind of balanced risk assessment almost of that situation.
And that's really interesting, the way you describe it, Hannah. And I think, given what you said a little earlier about, you know, being trained in mediation and having that idea of seeing things from another perspective, that all feeds into it, doesn't it? And I really like your description of you're essentially collaborating with that manager so that between you can come up with the best decision, the most appropriate, the most helpful decision. And I think that's a really, really hot tip for HR people wanting to think about how to frame that in their minds, particularly if challenge is not as comfortable to them as perhaps it is to you or was to you in that situation. But I think the idea of thinking we're not on opposing sides.
Yes,
absolutely. Actually, I'm here to inform and help and get involved in the decision rather than telling you what you can't do. Because I think sometimes HR sets itself up in opposition, as in the police with a clipboard saying you can't. How do you think you managed to navigate that? Is that something naturally within you, or is that something you had to work on?
I think I probably had to get a little bit braver to do it more effectively. I feel like I'm probably my natural approach is to kind of go, I suppose, I probably don't know best, but here's some of my thoughts. I know I don't know your area of expertise, but here's some of my experience. So doing it very much in a respectful way, because especially when you're working with, you know, different service, different types of service, and different organisations and things like that, you don't know the detail always of what they do. And, you know, as I say, I work for a local authority. The services that I supported were so far wide, you know, so wide ranging that you'd never be an expert in everything, but you can take a lot of what you've known from different areas and different types of organisation or different services and see how they could work in those areas.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't quite remember what the initial question was, but I think it is that it's learning as I've gone along. In fact, working with children's services was where I really honed that side of things, because I learned a lot about how they work with families. And at the end of the day, we are all human, and they are obviously working in very, very high pressure environments with a lot of interpersonal conflict.
Yeah, high emotions. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And the emotions are as high as they can possibly get. But you come into those situations within HR where emotions are extremely high, and it's understanding those individuals. So a lot of the really progressive work that they were doing within, I worked for Leeds City Council, so the children's services were doing some really progressive work around working with families. And it was very clear to me very early on that actually that approach works for people in general and conflict, difficult situations. And so a lot of what I probably have naturally, maybe, or more naturally, or it kind of fits with my approach, I honed it more in that way, taking on board some of the work that they did.
How interesting. I love that idea, that the business group that you're working with actually informs the HR practice. And I think at the heart of that is it's people, isn't it? It's people and it's emotions, and it's dealing with that.
And everyone's different, and everyone has a different perspective, different needs, different interests in a situation. And understanding that is really key to dealing with conflict effectively.
Yeah. So that sort of conflict resolution. And I think it's interesting as well, isn't it, to think that those sort of skills that we might use in our personal life, potentially, we might have come across, let's say you've had marriage guidance counselling, or, you know, all of those techniques are the same kind of techniques we should be employing when we're looking in our ER kit bag. As an HR professional.
There are so many kind of similarities between like mediation, coaching, counselling, you know, because ultimately it's dealing with humans and supporting them in difficult situations. For the best outcomes possible.
Very, very interesting. Fantastic. Well, we have time for one last question. So I'm going to ask you, where are you now and what's next for you?
Okay, so I made the decision to go it alone just over a year ago. It was like a year last October. So I'm working now as an independent HR consultant, working with lots of different organisations over different sectors, which is I'm really enjoying, really kind of. I suppose I found out that I'm a lot more capable than I thought I was. I'm enjoying all aspects of it, particularly like the business development side, meeting people, that networking side of things. But I've been working a lot on kind of more back to the operational side of HR, so a lot more disciplinaries, grievances, and policies, procedures, which has been really good and really interesting to do within different organisations. But my focus now for the next year is really trying to develop that HR director level support. So I think I'm hoping to be able to share a lot of the experience and knowledge that I have with SMEs and smaller organisations, but particularly maybe fast-growing organisations who are looking to develop effective workplace cultures and practices to progress.
Fantastic. Well, I wish you all the best with that. Anyone who needs HR support, you can find Hannah. So thank you very much for giving me some time, Hannah, and talking to me about your career. I'm sure the listeners are going to find it really, really useful. This is your HR Career Podcast, which you can find on my Substack. And I'll be sharing some of the ideas that we've discussed today, and I hope it's useful to everyone. So thank you very much for listening.